This woman was left with nothing. A divorce, no home, no job, and with a child in her arms. All she could afford was an abandoned, neglected house that everyone avoided. But she went in, and there, she saw something that would change her life forever. This is a story about faith, fear, and a second chance that never comes twice. Post in the comments, where are you watching from? Sarah's world had been irrevocably changed. Once married for 14 long years, she now found herself alone, struggling to piece together a life for herself and her little daughter, Emily. The weight of divorce bore down on her like an unyielding burden. Each day a reminder of lost promises and shattered dreams. The home they once knew had become a distant memory, replaced by cramped, aging apartments where hope grew thinner with every passing month. With rent overdue and a string of rejections from job applications, Sarah's dwindling savings offered little comfort against the encroaching threat of homelessness. On a piercingly cold evening in a small New England town in the United States, Sarah sat in the corner of a dimly lit diner. The tired clatter of dishes and soft hum of conversation did little to distract her from the storm inside. Her eyes, red-rimmed and reflective with quiet desperation, were glued to her aging smartphone. She had been scouring every online listing, hoping desperately to find something, a sliver of a future, for herself and Emily. That's when an ad caught her attention. Abandoned house for sale, only $900. The image was haunting. A once grand Victorian structure now marred by peeling paint, broken windows, and an air of forlorn neglect. Yet, to Sarah, it shimmered like a hidden gem amid the ruins of her shattered life. A lump formed in her throat as she read the description. The house, it promised, was in need of repair, but it offered the promise of space, of shelter, and, even more importantly, the chance for a new beginning. The asking price was steeply low, almost impossible to believe, yet her precarious finances meant that even her last $900 might be enough to secure it.
Sarah's togehash spun wildly.
On one hand, there was the terror of spending every last penny on something as uncertain as an abandoned house. Every plan she'd made for rebuilding her life hinged on that delicate balance between risk and survival. On the other, the alternative, continuing life in a cramped apartment plagued by uncertainty, seemed far worse. Her heartbeat quickened as she imagined Emily's smiling face in a home of their own, a sanctuary where the echoes of the past would be replaced by memories of laughter and hope. In the back of her mind, a persistent voice of caution whispered, "What if it's a trap? What if the place is beyond repair? Just another dead end?" Yet, the constant barrage of eviction notices and the gnawing fear of nature's harsh cruelty left her with little choice. With every overdue bill and every tear shed in the silence of the night, Sarah felt that this was her only slim chance to regain control over her destiny. That night, as rain traced sorrowful paths down the window of the diner, Sarah's trembling fingers hovered over the contact seller button. The decision seemed at once terrifying and liberating. A final, desperate act in the fierce battle for survival. In that single moment, the weight of her past, the grief of her failed marriage, and the anguish of lost stability converged into a spark of human resilience. With a final deep breath, she pressed the button. The screen hesitated for a moment, then lit up with details. The exact address, a promise that the seller would be waiting to show the property immediately, and a warning, serious inquiries only. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest like a rallying drumbeat. Was this the miracle she so desperately needed, or the plunge into an even deeper abyss? The rain intensified outside, echoing the uncertainty swirling in her mind as she stared at the invitation. While Emily slept soundly in a creaky rental room, blissfully unaware of the stakes her mother faced, Sarah felt the future opening before her like an unimaginable horizon. With her last $900 and a heart full of hope, she prepared for the journey to the abandoned house. A journey that promised either salvation or heartache. As she tucked her phone into her coat pocket and set out into the cold, dark night, one thought haunted her every step. Could this dilapidated relic of a house really become the sanctuary that would change everything? The next morning dawned cold and gray as Sarah drove through winding country roads toward the address listed on the online advertisement. The abandoned house loomed in the distance. A hulking, derelict structure wrapped in creeping ivy and cloaked in mystery. Its once proud Victorian architecture now bore the scars of time. Sagging porches, shattered stained glass windows, and a peeling facade that whispered secrets of ages past. Though doubts tugged at her heart, Sarah clutched her keys with determined resolve. With her last $900 spent on the down payment, there was no turning back. Upon arriving, she parked in a cracked, overgrown driveway. The air felt heavy with memories of a time long forgotten. As she stepped out of her battered car with Emily in tow, the little girl's eyes widened in horror at the sight of the neglected mansion. Emily clung to her mother's hand, her small body trembling despite being wrapped in a threadbare sweater. "Mommy, it looks scary," she whispered, voice quivering as she stared at the darkened windows and rusted gates. Sarah knelt, smoothing Emily's unruly hair. "I know it seems frightening, sweetheart," she said softly, trying to infuse comfort into her words. "But sometimes, the most beautiful stories are hidden behind closed doors. Today, we're starting a new chapter." Though every instinct screamed caution, hope mingled with a sense of adventure breathed life into her spirit. With a deep, steadying breath, she led Emily through the creaking front door that groaned in protest as if awakened from a long, silent slumber. The interior of the house was a tangled relic of the past. A labyrinth of dark corridors, dust-choked rooms, and muted echoes of voices long silenced. The air was musty and cool, carrying the scent of decay intertwined with the faint aroma of ozone, as if the place still remembered a time when life peacefully pulsed within its walls. Dim daylight filtered through grimy glass, casting elongated shadows that danced across the warped wooden floors. Sarah's footsteps were measured, each step filled with equal parts trepidation and hope. She could almost hear the heartbeat of the house echoing her own. Emily's initial terror was palpable as strange creaks and whispers of wind caused her to startle repeatedly. She clung even tighter to her mother as they passed through a narrow hallway lined with faded wallpaper and cracked portraits, whose eyes seemed fixated on their every move. Despite the eerie ambience that made every shadow look alive, Sarah remained determined. She explained in gentle tones to Emily that every old home has its stories, and that today, they were here to discover one. Their own. After a few hours of hauling a few battered suitcases, a couple of worn boxes, and a suitcase passed down from her mother, Sarah attempted to settle into what she hoped would be a new beginning. Exhaustion mingled with adrenaline as she showed Emily to a small room at the back of the house. Although there was little light and the windows offered only a view of overgrown gardens and dark, unmowed lawns, it was theirs. Sarah whispered reassurances, promising that this would be the start of something wonderful, even if the present felt shrouded in mystery and uncertainty. Later that evening, while Emily slept fitfully in the child's room, Sarah found herself alone in the vast parlor. The silence was profound yet laced with a hum of hidden energy. She carefully explored each room with the cautious curiosity of someone searching for scraps of hope among the ruins. In one of the back halls, a narrow corridor leading to what once might have been a library, Sarah noticed a subtle irregularity in the worn wooden floorboards. A slight bulge, almost imperceptible, beckoned her nearer. Her heart quickened as she knelt down, running her fingers along the edge of a loose plank. With a trembling hand, she eased the board upwards, revealing a space that had lain concealed for decades. There, nestled in the cool, dusty gloom, was a strange iron box. Its surface was marred by rust and time, yet its intricate design hinted at a craftsmanship that had not been common in recent decades. Wrapped in faded cloth, the box exuded a sense of significance, as if it were a time capsule waiting patiently for the right moment to divulge its secrets. Sarah's pulse raced as she lifted the box into her hands. In a mix of reverence and anxiety, she gingerly pried it open. Inside lay a carefully organized collection of items. A bundle of yellowed, neatly folded letters tied with a fraying ribbon. A set of brittle, hand-drawn maps whose lines traced roads and boundaries that no longer existed, and a small leather-bound notebook containing faded photographs of a dignified African-American woman and a smiling child whose eyes shone with a quiet determination. The photographs captured moments of joy and resilience, a stark contrast to the loneliness of the abandoned corridors. As Sarah pored over each delicate document, she began to perceive a story emerging from the silence of the past. The letters were written in a graceful, flowing script, and they spoke of love, loss, and the trials of a life lived against the backdrop of societal prejudice. The maps hinted at journeys taken, hope traveled, and secret routes that might have once led to freedom. Every photograph, every carefully preserved note, carried the weight of a history that Sarah had never known, a history that seemed to pulse with the very lifeblood of the house itself. For a long, suspended moment, Sarah felt as if the abandoned house had finally come alive, whispering its long-forgotten tale to her. Tears welled in her eyes as the enormity of what she had found settled upon her shoulders. Could it be that within these neglected walls lay evidence of someone extraordinary, someone who had endured unspeakable hardships yet had left behind remnants of triumph and love? The mystery was both overwhelming and intoxicating, her own personal key to a past that might hold the promise of transformation. The distant sound of a creaking floorboard snapped Sarah out of her reverie. The house seemed to breathe around her like a living entity, and somewhere in the quivering dark, something unknown stirred. With the iron box clutched tightly in her arms and a mind swirling with questions that demanded answers, Sarah knew that life as she knew it was about to change in the most unforeseen way. Clutching the rusted iron box, Sarah sat cross-legged on the cold, creaking floor of the narrow hallway. In the dim glow from a single dusty window, she carefully untied the fraying ribbon that bound a neat stack of yellowed letters. Each envelope was adorned in elegant cursive, a handwriting so delicate it seemed to have been penned with trembling reverence. As she unfolded the first letter, a mixture of sorrow and resilience filled the room. The letter was from a woman named Eleanor Daniels, an African-American nurse who had once cared for the wounded during World War II, a time when hope was a rare commodity and survival came at a steep price. Eleanor's words, laden with both pain and quiet pride, spoke of long nights spent tending to the injured, of secret meetings held in the twilight of segregation, and of dreams deferred but never completely extinguished. Sarah's heart pounded as she absorbed each carefully chosen word. In tender, yet resolute lines, Eleanor described the hardships she had faced, the relentless sting of racial injustice, the grief of watching loved ones suffer, and the constant struggle to preserve dignity in a hostile world. Yet, amidst the despair, her letter radiated an unyielding hope. She wrote of the abandoned house as a refuge, a place where she had once hidden not only from the brutal glare of prejudice, but also from the ghosts of a painful past. The correspondence revealed that the home, once vibrant with life, had become the last sanctuary for Eleanor during a time when she was forced to flee, a silent witness to a secret that would, perhaps, outlive the scars of history. Between the letters, a fragile, hand-drawn map caught Sarah's attention. The map was intricate and cryptic, its faded ink outlining winding corridors, secret passages, and even marking a spot deep within the house's foundation labeled simply as safe. Alongside the map lay several old photographs, images of a dignified woman in a crisp, white nurse's uniform, with eyes that glimmered with both determination and vulnerability, and a little girl whose smile shone despite the hardships of that era. The juxtaposition of Eleanor's gentle strength with the innocent hope captured in the child's gaze stirred something deep within Sarah. In those images, she saw reflections of the struggles she had faced as a single mother, fighting against a world that had so often dismissed her humanity. Overwhelmed yet compelled to understand more, Sarah pored over every line of Eleanor's letters. There were hints of clandestine messages, subtle admonitions to hide evidence of a treasure, a trove of documents, keepsakes, perhaps even personal memorabilia that Eleanor had locked away for safekeeping. The idea of a hidden safe, secreted away behind false walls or concealed under worn floorboards, began to form in Sarah's mind. The meticulous detail with which Eleanor had described her escape and the temporary sanctuary that the house provided awakened an unspoken promise that the abandoned dwelling was more than just a crumbling structure. It was a repository of forgotten stories, a bridge between a painful past and a hopeful future. Amidst the tangle of emotions, Sarah began noting down every clue, the intimate language used in the letters, the recurring symbolism in Eleanor's descriptions, and the faint, almost imperceptible references to a hidden truth, all hinted at mysteries yet unsolved. A particular passage described how Eleanor had once discovered a concealed compartment in the basement wall, a secret that she vowed would forever protect the memory of those who had suffered silently under the weight of injustice. With each word, Sarah felt a kinship bloom between her own struggles and Eleanor's relentless fight for dignity and recognition. It was as if the echoes of Eleanor's life were calling out to her, urging Sarah to unearth not only a piece of history but the very soul of the house. Sarah's fingers trembled as she turned the pages of the leather-bound notebook tucked at the bottom of the box. The notebook contained faded photographs and scant, heartfelt notes scribbled in the margins. One entry detailed a painful farewell, a departure from a chaotic life filled with unspoken promises, and a hopeful anticipation of a secret future, protected as if by a prayer. The handwritten notes hinted at a legacy carefully preserved over decades, one that was both fragile and precious. The magnitude of what she held in her hands slowly began to sink in. This was no mere collection of relics but the living memory of a woman who had defied an unforgiving world. As tears welled silently in her eyes, Sarah felt an intricate tapestry of emotions. Along with the pain of hardship and loss, there was a burning ember of possibility. The discoveries whispered of a hidden past that could illuminate the present, a chance to honor those who had been forgotten and to reclaim dignity in the echo of despair. In that profound moment, the abandoned house transformed before her eyes. It was no longer simply a liability or a symbol of despair. It was the keeper of a secret, a silent storyteller awaiting rediscovery. Before Sarah could collect her swirling thoughts, however, a distant sound broke through the stillness. A low, persistent creak from somewhere deep within the unseen corners of the mansion. The sound was followed by a soft, almost imperceptible tapping, as if something new was about to be revealed. With the iron box pressed tightly to her chest and her heart racing with anticipation, Sarah knew that the answers she sought were hidden within these very walls. The house, once silent and neglected, seemed poised on the brink of revealing one final mystery, one that might forever alter the path of her life. The days following the discovery of the iron box passed in a pleasantly disorienting blur for Sarah. Sleep was elusive as memories and possibilities danced relentlessly through her mind. With the letters, maps, and photographs whispering tales of a life from decades past, she became increasingly consumed by the need to understand the story of Eleanor Daniels, a woman whose quiet courage resonated deeply with Sarah's own struggle for dignity. Determined to learn more about the house's mysterious former inhabitant, Sarah set her fading remnants of hope on tracing the origins of these relics. Early one chilly afternoon, after Emily had been dropped off at school, Sarah drove to a modest, time-worn building on the outskirts of town, the local historical archive. The structure itself was a relic. Brick walls faded by years of sun and rain, stained glass windows that caught the light in dusty hues, and a heavy wooden door that creaked ominously as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old paper and polished wood, a tangible memory of those who had painstakingly preserved the town's history. At a long, scarred counter sat Miss Jenkins, the archivist, whose knowledgeable eyes conveyed a lifetime spent among the records of forgotten lives. Sarah explained her quest hesitantly, showing Ms. Jenkins the faded envelope addressed to Eleanor Daniels. "I found these in an abandoned house," Sarah explained, voice trembling with both excitement and trepidation. "They're signed by Eleanor Daniels, who seems to have once lived in that very house. I need to know more about her, and the house's past." Ms. Jenkins' eyes softened as she delicately reached for a ledger and a series of microfiche reels. "Eleanor Daniels," the archivist murmured. "Yes, she was a local nurse during World War II, a black woman whose service and sacrifice were not widely recognized at the time." The archivist went on to reveal that Eleanor had faced unspeakable hardships in a segregated society and had sought refuge in the very house Sarah now called home. Newspaper clippings, census records, and obituaries painted a quiet yet defiant picture of a woman who had not only cared for the wounded, but had also defended her personal freedom against relentless racial persecution. Fingers trembling with reverence, Sarah pored over scanned documents, aged newspapers with brittle edges, and handwritten notes from community members who remembered Eleanor's kindness. One faded clipping caught her eye, a brief, almost cryptic mention of a hidden treasure secured within these walls to preserve the story of a brave soul. The phrase sent shivers down her spine. Ms. Jenkins explained that local lore had long whispered about a secret compartment or safe, hidden in the basement of Eleanor's home. It was said to contain personal mementos, vital documents, and perhaps even evidence of her escape from an oppressive past. Many believed it was nothing more than a folktale, Ms. Jenkins admitted, until some records hinted that Eleanor herself had taken extraordinary measures to ensure that her legacy would survive. Armed with this new information and a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah left the archive with copies of every relevant document she could obtain. The weight of Eleanor's life, her sorrows, her triumphs, and the tangible proof of her perseverance, now pressed against Sarah's heart. On the drive back to the abandoned house, Sarah's mind raced. She realized that the safe wasn't just a physical fixture in the building. It was the keystone of a bygone era of hidden resilience, and perhaps the evidence that could redeem the dilapidated property for both historical preservation and her own future. Back at the house, as twilight melted into a velvety darkness, Sarah retraced the silent corridors once more. The eerie ambience that had greeted her before now took on a different hue. Each creak and whisper felt laden with significance. Heart pounding, she made her way to the basement stairs. As she descended, her flashlight beam danced across peeling walls and dusty floors. The air was cool and damp, carrying the murmurs of decades past. In the far corner of the basement, behind a stack of worn crates and discarded furniture, Sarah discovered a section of the wall that appeared oddly textured. Guided by the hints from Eleanor's letters and that elusive archive detail, she pressed her hand against a portion of rough brick. It gave a faint, hollow sound. The realization struck her like a jolt. With cautious determination, she began to remove a series of aged boards that had long been obscured by neglect. The process was painstaking. The boards were brittle and heavy with dust, but the promise of uncovering Eleanor's secret pushed her forward. After what seemed like an eternity of gentle scrapes and whispered prayers, the final board slipped away, revealing a small, inconspicuous safe embedded in the wall. It was old, its metal cast in a style reminiscent of a war-era safe, robust, yet weathered by time. On its surface, faint markings and rivets told a tale of careful craftsmanship, one that had endured the passing years in silence. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she contemplated the possibility contained within that safe. Could it hold personal papers, treasured mementos, or perhaps evidence of Eleanor's life and struggles that had remained hidden from the world? With trembling hands, Sarah reached for the safe's handle. Her heart throbbed with equal parts fear and exhilarating anticipation. Every moment, every memory of her own battles and the echoes from Eleanor's brief communications converged on this singular, defining moment. The cold metal of the safe felt like the link between past and present, a portal through which the suppressed story of a remarkable woman might at last be told. As she slowly turned the handle, the sound of metal grinding on metal resonated softly, holding within it the promise of transformation. Before the safe could fully reveal its secrets, the floor above groaned under an unseen weight. The house, as if alive, stirred in response to Sarah's intrusion. With the safe momentarily ajar and her fingers clutching the edge of history, Sarah realized that what lay inside might not only reshape her future, but also uncover truths that could change the narrative of an entire community. The discovery of the safe had left Sarah trembling with a mixture of awe and trepidation. In the cold silence of the basement, she remained transfixed by the relic before her, a tangible testament to Eleanor Daniels' secret past. But even as she began to gingerly explore its contents, a new sound began to emerge from above, the steady, insistent tapping of footsteps on wooden floorboards. It wasn't the whisper of the house settling. It was deliberate, purposeful. Later that evening, as Sarah sat at a rickety wooden table in the main parlor, carefully spreading out the fragile letters and faded photographs, A sharp rap on the front door startled her. She paused, her heart pounding fiercely in her chest, clutching one of Eleanor's letters as if it were a lifeline. Opening the door with cautious resolve, she found herself face to face with a pair of stern-looking county officials. One, a heavy-set man in a worn blazer with an official-looking badge pinned on his chest, introduced himself as Mr. Reynolds. "Ma'am," he began gravely, "we have been notified that your property, this abandoned house, might possess significant historical value. Furthermore, there are serious safety concerns and zoning violations that need to be addressed immediately." Before Sarah could muster a response, Mr. Reynolds continued, "Under county regulation, properties such as these, especially ones that have fallen into neglect, are subject to immediate review. In cases where there's historical significance or potential public interest, the county reserves the right to reclaim and rehabilitate the structure for the greater community." The words hit her like a physical blow. This was not merely an inquiry, it was an imminent threat. The official's eyes bore into hers as though they could read the desperation and fragile hope that Sarah had invested, not only in the neglected walls of the house but in the possibility of reclaiming a future for herself and Emily. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The house was all she had left, her final stand against the unraveling of her life. Could the county really strip away the last vestige of hope by seizing this property? I bought this house with my last savings," she stammered, voice trembling with both fear and indignation. "This house, it means everything to me and to my daughter." Mr. Reynolds' expression remained impassive, and his tone was final. "Ma'am, while we understand your attachment, our investigation will commence immediately. We must determine if the property poses any threats and assess its historical claims. We will issue a notice regarding remediation or, if necessary, confiscation for preservation and public use. I suggest you gather all available documentation regarding your purchase." His words, clipped and bureaucratic, left little room for negotiation. As the officials turned to leave, Sarah's mind raced. Her newfound treasure, a safe containing relics of a remarkable life, was the only bond connecting her to a legacy of resilience and hope. Now, it seemed that same legacy was suddenly being used as ammunition against her. The county's sudden interest was not born purely out of concern for safety. It smacked of opportunism, a pretext to seize a property that had become a symbol of forgotten history and potential cultural rebirth. In the days that followed, Sasha found herself besieged by further visits from county agents and code enforcement officers. Notices arrived at her door, rigid and impersonal, citing dangerous conditions, structural instability, and pending fines that threatened to plunge her further into debt. Each document was a nail in the coffin of her hard-won sanctuary. Yet, amid the storm of legal jargon and bureaucratic coldness, a spark had been lit. Neighbors, having caught wind of the unfolding drama, began to murmur in hushed tones about the house's mysterious past, about Eleanor Daniels, the courageous nurse whose story had been nearly erased by time. Late one rain-soaked night, as the wind rattled the broken windows of the house, Sarah sat at her rickety dining table, poring over the documents salvaged from the iron safe. The letters were windows into a life drowned in struggle and unyielding strength during World War II. There, tucked away beneath a brittle map and a photograph of a smiling little girl, lay a small handwritten note. Its faded ink read, "For the ones who believe that hope, even in darkness, can ignite a revolution." Tears blurred Sarah's vision as the message resonated deeply within her. This was not just Eleanor's legacy. It could be her own. Just as she resolved to fight back, the sound of a siren sliced through the quiet. At her front door, a group of county officials, led by Mr. Reynolds, awaited her arrival. Clutched in his hand was an official-looking legal summons, accompanied by a terse command that she appear at a county hearing within 48 hours to determine the future of the house. The summons was not merely a procedure, it was an ultimatum to surrender her claim. In that charged moment, as thunder rumbled outside and the ancient walls of the house murmured secrets they had long guarded, Sarah felt an overwhelming surge of resolve. The house was more than a structure. It was a symbol of survival, a repository of hidden histories that had the potential to transform her life and the community's conscience. Her fight was no longer only about keeping a roof over her head. It was about defending the sanctity of a legacy, defending Eleanor Daniels' memory, and defending her own last beacon of hope. With the summons clutched tightly in her shaking hand, Sarah knew that this was the turning point, the moment when the battle for her future and for the truth hidden within these walls would reach a fever pitch. Would she cede this relic to heartless bureaucracy, or would she harness the depths of her courage to fight for a history and a home that deserved to live on? The county's legal assault on Sarah's claim had reached a fevered pitch. Over the past few days, the abandoned house, the very symbol of her last hope, had been the subject of heated debate at town hall meetings, impromptu community gatherings, and now, finally, in a packed county courtroom. It was a chilly, overcast morning, the kind that seemed to settle heavy droplets of determination on everyone present. Sarah, dressed in a worn but neat blouse and jeans, sat in the defendant's seat with her trembling hands folded in her lap. Her eyes, though glistening with the residue of sleepless nights, burned with a fierce certainty. This house, with its hidden secrets and dormant legacy, belonged to the community of lost souls yearning for a fresh start, and, more importantly, belonged to her. At the lectern stood Mr. Reynolds once again, flanked by a team of county attorneys. Their tone was clinical, their stance unyielding. They argued, with all the bureaucratic precision they could muster, that the property was a safety hazard, that its structural decay warranted immediate intervention, and that its unsupervised transfer to a private individual, Sarah, would only endanger the public and erase an important piece of local history. They laid out charts and inspector reports that showed crumbling beams and exposed wiring. They questioned the legitimacy of Sarah's purchase, casting doubt on her financial means and the authenticity of a deal so audaciously cheap. $900 of all prices. But then, as the county attorneys began their closing remarks, the courtroom air shifted. On one side of the dais sat Sarah's attorney, Ms. Ramirez, a seasoned lawyer with gentle eyes and a voice that commanded respect. She rose, her documents neatly arranged in front of her, and began to tell a story that would challenge every sterile statistic and hollow regulation in the room. "Your Honor," Ms. Ramirez addressed the judge with measured passion, "what we have here is not merely a rundown building devoid of value. In these very walls lies the enduring spirit and legacy of Eleanor Daniels, a woman who, against insurmountable odds, sheltered hope and dignity during one of our nation's darkest hours. The evidence before you, a cache of letters, intricate maps, and photographs, is not only historically significant, it is a testament to the resilience of a community that refused to yield under oppression." With deliberate care, Ms. Ramirez produced copies of the archival records Sarah had brought from the local archive and the personal relics salvaged from the basement safe. The courtroom screen flickered to life with facsimiles of Eleanor's handwritten letters. One particularly poignant passage read, "Through the darkness, I have hidden the light that can one day guide us home." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience as local historians and community activists, sitting in the gallery, exchanged knowing glances. Ms. Ramirez continued, "We admit that the structure requires attention, that it has weathered years of neglect. But the county's role is not to erase history out of fear. It is to preserve it. This property, far from being just a liability, is a living museum of our collective journey. A journey that includes the sacrifices, the cultural shifts, and the heroic struggles of those long forgotten. To seize it without due consideration would not be an act of public safety. It would be an affront to the very ideals we claim to uphold as a society." Her words resonated with a raw force that even the stiff county officials could no longer ignore. One by one, community members began to rise from their seats. A local teacher recounted how her curriculum had been enriched by stories of Eleanor Daniels' quiet heroism. A retired laborer, his voice shaking with emotion, described how the neglected neighborhoods depended on historical preservation to remind them that their struggles were not in vain. Social media feeds erupted outside the courthouse as live streams captured the impassioned declarations from ordinary citizens demanding justice and remembrance. The judge, a middle-aged man with a reputation for fairness, listened intently. His gavel remained silent as he weighed the competing narratives of governmental caution versus community heritage. The turning point came when a well-respected local historian took the stand. Holding a fragile, original newspaper clipping from the 1940s, she declared, "For decades, I have fought to preserve Eleanor Daniels' story. Her courage is woven into the foundation of this community. It would be a tragedy beyond measure to allow bureaucratic indifference to destroy not only a building but an irreplaceable chapter of our shared history." In that charged atmosphere, even the county officials' arguments began to crumble. Mr. Reynolds' cold assertions were now drowned out by the passionate pleas of a community that had finally found its voice. The judge's gavel tapped softly as he prepared to deliver his ruling, a moment that seemed to stretch for an eternity. After what felt like an age of silence, the judge finally spoke. "In light of the compelling evidence and the overwhelming support of the community, I rule in favor of Sarah. I hereby order a moratorium on any county actions to seize the property until a thorough historical preservation assessment is conducted. Moreover, I recognize the significant cultural value this building holds, and I recommend that the county consider granting funds for its restoration as a site of historical and community importance." A collective sigh of relief and exuberant applause reverberated through the courtroom. Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched Emily's hand tightly. The decision was not just a legal victory. It was a reclamation of hope, a promise that her life, and the legacy of a remarkable woman from the past, would not be cast away with bureaucratic neglect. As the officials departed and community members congratulated her with heartfelt embraces, Sarah's newfound determination soared. With the county's grant application now poised for approval and plans for restoration already whispering through local media, the abandoned house was beginning to evolve from a monument of despair into a beacon of renewal. Yet, even in this triumphant moment, Sarah couldn't shake the distant rumble of challenges still to come. The quiet murmur of dissent from powerful interests, the unresolved questions about the full extent of Eleanor's secret legacy, and the delicate negotiations that lay ahead hinted that the battle for truth was far from over. Standing amidst a sea of relieved faces and hopeful voices, Sarah silently vowed that her journey would not end with this ruling. There was still so much left to uncover, so many stories to honor. As she stepped out of the courthouse into the crisp afternoon air, the weight of new responsibilities mingled with the dazzling promise of change. The house had given her more than shelter. It had given her a mission. A year had passed since that fateful day when Sarah stood in the courthouse, clutching her summons as if it were a beacon of defiance. The abandoned house, once a crumbling relic of despair, had transformed into a vibrant sanctuary of hope, a cultural center that now pulsed with the heartbeat of the community. Under the gentle guidance of Sarah and a dedicated coalition of local volunteers, architects, and preservationists, the house underwent a miraculous metamorphosis. Every neglected wall bore new life with carefully restored murals that echoed the long-forgotten history of Eleanor Daniels, the brave nurse whose quiet letters and faded photographs had kindled the spark of change. Old floorboards were repaired. Shattered stained glass windows were replaced with handcrafted replicas of their former glory, and a new community space was carved into a previously unused wing where local artisans, historians, and neighborhood children could gather. The mosaic of history and hope was now visible to all. Sarah's world had been reshaped along with the house. No longer was she defined solely by the heartbreak of divorce or the crushing weight of financial ruin. Instead, she wore her scars like medals, evidence of sacrifices made in the name of survival and renewal. Each day, as she watched Emily skip along the freshly painted corridor with a beaming smile and an infectious laughter that filled every corner, Sarah felt a deep, abiding joy. The little girl, once quiet and cautious in a cramped rental, now flourished in an environment brimming with creativity and community spirit. The cultural center quickly grew into a hub of artistic expression and historical appreciation. Local historians organized guided tours, sharing Eleanor's story alongside the broader narrative of the town's untold struggles and triumphs. Workshops in art, music, and literature were held in the revamped community room, a space that once echoed with silence, now ablaze with the vibrant sounds of pottery wheels, guitar strings, and impassioned discussion. The center became a living classroom and a safe haven for those who had long felt invisible, empowering them to reclaim their narratives and write new chapters for the future. Inspired by the unfolding transformation, Sarah began chronicling her own journey, a journey steeped in hardship, mystique, and, ultimately, reawakening. In a modest home office set up in a refurbished corner of the center, she poured her heart onto the pages of a book that recounted her descent into despair, the reckless leap of faith that led her to the neglected house, and the miraculous discoveries that unfolded thereafter. It was a story of resilience, belief, and the transformative power of embracing the unknown. As her manuscript took shape, Sarah dreamed of the day when her words might inspire others to risk everything for a chance at renewal. Still, the road had not been without its shadows. Though the court had ruled in her favor, powerful interests had not entirely retreated into silence. They lingered in whispered discontent, unsettled by the public's newfound appetite for truth and heritage. Yet, as county officials observed the rejuvenation of the once forlorn property, even they were compelled to reconsider their old plans. The very entity that had threatened to erase a precious piece of history was now celebrated as a symbol of resilience, prompting policy reviews that promised more support for preserving local landmarks. Community gatherings became regular events at the center. Neighbors who once passed the house with wary glances now lingered to share their stories, memories, and dreams for the future. A mosaic installation crafted by local children depicted the storied journey of a woman who dared to risk everything for a fragment of hope, a tribute to both Eleanor Daniels and Sarah herself. The center's walls bore the echoes of voices that had been silenced for too long, now amplified into a chorus of unity and possibility. On the anniversary of the house's acquisition, an exuberant celebration was held under the golden glow of a setting sun. As Sarah took the makeshift stage to address the gathered crowd, a blend of longtime residents, newly inspired advocates, and luminaries in cultural preservation, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "This house," she began, voice steady yet choked with emotion, "started as my last hope, a desperate gamble of $900 and faith in a future I desperately needed. Today, it stands as a testament to every soul that refused to be diminished by circumstance, that dared to dream of miracles in the midst of ruins." Standing behind her, Emily clutched a handmade sign reading, "Our house, our heart." The applause that followed was more than a celebration of a building's restoration. It was the drumbeat of a community reborn. Sarah's eyes swept over the crowd, glistening with unshed tears and unspoken promises. In that moment, the journey from despair to hope was etched into every heart present. Later that evening, as the lights dimmed over the renovated halls and the echoes of laughter and music lingered like a sweet refrain, Sarah quietly returned to her study. With a gentle smile, she opened a fresh notebook and began writing the first lines of her memoir. Each sentence was a tribute to the mysterious legacy of Eleanor Daniels, every challenge she had overcome, and the boundless possibility that had emerged from risking everything. The legacy of an old house had become a living, breathing monument, a beacon for those who believed that life, no matter how broken, could always be mended. Outside, the night sky glittered with stars as though in silent applause. The abandoned house had not only given Sarah and Emily shelter, it had unlocked a miracle, a transformation that rippled outward, touching countless lives. A future once marred by loss was now painted with the vibrant hues of hope, culture, and unity. Sometimes the smallest risk can unlock the biggest miracle. Subscribe and stay with us for the next story that could change your life too.